Scientists in Florida are sounding the alarm over what they're calling a wildlife issue of our time.
Picture this. You're walking through the Florida Everglades, and suddenly a snake the size of a small car locks onto your leg and starts dragging you through the swamp. That is not a horror movie. That is what happened on January 13th, 2026, when a 202-pound Burmese python was captured in South Florida. And here's the part that should really get your attention. A snake that massive is not just big, it is an apex-level eating machine. When Burmese pythons reach that size, the question isn't whether they can wipe out wildlife. The question is how much they've already wiped out before anyone even sees them. This story starts in Big Cypress National Preserve, near the Everglades, where licensed python hunter Carl Jackson spotted what looked like a smaller snake trail crossing over the tracks of his truck. At first, it didn't seem like anything extraordinary. But when he followed that trail into the brush, he came face to face with one of the biggest Burmese pythons ever captured in Florida. Not 50 pounds, not 100, 202 pounds, nearly 17 feet long. A female so heavy and powerful that when Jackson grabbed her, she wrapped around his leg and dragged him roughly 10 to 15 feet across the ground. He later described it like riding a slow horse. Imagine that for a second. A full-grown man trained to catch invasive pythons being physically pulled through the Everglades by a snake. And if that doesn't make your stomach tighten, this part will. The python wasn't just huge, it was carrying around 200 eggs. So in one moment, hunters didn't just remove a monster from the swamp. They prevented what could have become hundreds more predators spreading through one of the most fragile ecosystems in America. Now, when people hear a headline like this, the first thing they want to know is obvious. What could a snake that size actually eat? And the honest answer is deeply unsettling. Burmese pythons in Florida have been documented eating everything from rabbits and raccoons to deer and alligators, whole. These snakes don't chew. They overpower, constrict, and then slowly swallow prey that looks impossibly large compared to their own bodies. That means every duck, every marsh rabbit, every fox, every wading bird, and in some cases even large reptiles can end up on the menu. Scientists and wildlife officials have been sounding the alarm for years because this is not just about one giant snake. This is about an invasive species that has turned parts of South Florida into a hunting ground. In some areas, native mammal populations have crashed so dramatically that the landscape itself has changed. Animals that used to be common became rare. Some practically vanished from places where they once thrived. That's what makes this 202-pound python so terrifying. It's not just the size. It's what that size represents. To understand why, we need to back up for a moment. Burmese pythons are native to Southeast Asia. They are not supposed to be in Florida. But over the years, mostly because of the exotic pet trade and human releases, they established themselves in the Everglades and surrounding habitats. And once they got a foothold there, the environment gave them almost everything they needed. Warm temperatures, thick cover, water everywhere, huge stretches of difficult terrain, plenty of prey, very few natural checks. In other words, the Everglades became the perfect place for an ambush predator to disappear. That's one of the biggest reasons this invasion got so bad. These snakes are unbelievably hard to find. They blend into mud, water, reeds, shadows, and brush so well that even experienced trackers can walk right past one. You can be 10 feet away from a massive python and still not see it. That's not an exaggeration. These animals are built to vanish, and while they're vanishing, they're feeding. A smaller python might go after rodents, birds, or rabbits. A larger one starts moving up the food chain. At extreme sizes, the menu becomes disturbing. Deer are possible. Alligators are possible. But scientists have documented giant Burmese pythons with prey so large it seems unreal until you see the evidence. In one famous Florida case, a massive python had eaten an alligator about 6 feet long. In another, researchers found a whole alligator inside an 18-foot python during a necropsy. So, when a 202-pound female is found in the Everglades, nobody in wildlife management sees just a snake. They see a serious ecological threat, and the biology of these snakes makes the situation worse. Pythons are efficient in a way that almost feels unfair. They can go long periods without food, then consume an enormous meal in one sitting. Their jaws stretch, their bodies expand. Their digestive systems ramp up with astonishing intensity. Recent research has shown Burmese pythons can process whole prey, even handling the bones. That means when they catch something, they waste very little. They are like silent, living traps that can sit, wait, strike, and then disappear again for days or weeks. Now imagine that kind of predator multiplied across miles and miles of swamp. That's why the detail about the 200 eggs matters so much. One giant female python is already dangerous, but a breeding female is something else entirely. Every egg is a future hunter. Not every hatchling survives, of course, but enough do. Enough to keep the cycle going, enough to keep pressure on wildlife year after year. And this is where the story shifts from shocking to almost surreal. The 202-pound python caught in January 2026 was the second heaviest Burmese python ever recorded in Florida. The record is even bigger. A 215-pound female captured in 2022, nearly 18 feet long. Think about that. Florida isn't just dealing with random escaped pets anymore. It is producing giant, breeding, ecosystem-altering constrictors at a scale that rivals anything outside their native range. That tells us two things. First, this invasive population is not temporary. It is established. Second, somewhere out there, there are probably more snakes of similar size that nobody has found yet. That is the part most people miss. The snakes we see are the visible edge of a much larger problem. Hunters catch one, and headlines explode because it looks unbelievable. But wildlife experts know the more troubling reality is the number of pythons that remain hidden. The Everglades is vast, dense, wet, wild. A snake can live there for years without ever crossing a road or showing up on camera. Meanwhile, it keeps feeding. And what does that feeding do to the ecosystem? It unravels it from the bottom up. When native mammals disappear, predators lose food, birds lose nesting safety. Plant systems shift because animals that once spread seeds or grazed certain areas are gone. The Everglades is not just a postcard swamp full of reeds and water, it's a living network. Pull enough pieces out, and the entire system starts behaving differently. That's why wildlife agencies, scientists, and contractors hunt these pythons so aggressively. This is not about fear for fear's sake. It's not about turning snakes into movie monsters. It's about damage that is measurable, visible, and ongoing. And still, even with all that effort, catching one is dangerous. Think again about what happened during that January encounter. Carl Jackson was not an amateur stumbling into the woods. He was a licensed hunter working specifically on this problem. He saw the tracks, followed them, and ended up in a fight with a snake powerful enough to drag him through ant hills and toward a canal. He needed help from his wife and children to subdue it. That detail matters because it shows just how much raw strength a snake like this has. People sometimes underestimate constrictors because they aren't venomous, but not venomous does not mean harmless. A nearly 17-foot python weighing 202 pounds is an enormous coil of muscle. Once it wraps, every second matters. Now, to be clear, Burmese pythons are not hunting humans in Florida. That's important. The real crisis here is ecological, not some daily man-eating snake scenario. But when you're dealing with an animal that can overpower deer, fight alligators, and drag an adult man through swamp vegetation, the danger is still very real for anyone who handles one. And that brings us back to the title of this story. What did it eat? That question is terrifying, not just because of one stomach content report, but because we already know what a python this size is capable of eating. The evidence from Florida has piled up for years. Mammals, birds, reptiles, deer, alligators, anything that fits the limits of its body and its jaw. And recent research suggests those limits may be even bigger than scientists once believed. So the truly frightening answer is this: a 202-pound Burmese python in the Everglades doesn't need one shocking meal to scare wildlife experts. Its entire existence is the warning. It means the ecosystem can support a predator that large. It means the predator had time to grow. It means it had enough food to reach that size. And it means that for a long time before capture, it was winning. That may be the most chilling part of all. Not the fight, not the headline, not even the eggs. The fact that this snake had already survived, hunted, and grown to monstrous size in an environment where it does not belong. And if you're wondering how the state is even supposed to fight that, the answer is with difficulty. Florida has python removal programs, licensed hunters, tracking efforts, research partnerships, and public challenges designed to reduce numbers. Scientists use radio-tagged scout snakes to locate breeding groups. Hunters patrol roads, canals, and remote swamp areas. Researchers study movement, reproduction, feeding, and thermal tolerance. But despite all that, nobody pretends this is easy. Because you are trying to remove a secretive, highly adaptable predator from one of the hardest landscapes in America to search. That is a nightmare equation. You have an animal that hides well, reproduces heavily, eats broadly, and survives in a giant wetland where humans can only access small portions efficiently. Even when experts catch hundreds or thousands, the broader battle is still uphill. And yet, captures like this one matter a lot. One breeding female removed is a big deal. A breeding female carrying around 200 eggs is an even bigger deal. A breeding female that weighs 202 pounds and ranks among the heaviest ever found in Florida is a massive win for the people trying to protect what's left of the Everglades' native wildlife. Still, there's an uncomfortable truth underneath that win. If one hunter can stumble onto the second heaviest python ever recorded, then what else is out there in the grass, in the tree islands, near the canals, under the shadows of cypress and sawgrass, waiting to be found? That question is why stories like this keep going viral. Not just because giant snakes are shocking, but because they tap into something primal. The idea that in a modern American landscape, there are still places where something ancient, muscular, silent, and almost prehistoric can lie hidden in plain sight. And for the Everglades, that's not imagination. That's management reality. The swamp is beautiful, but it is not gentle. It has always been a place of predators, water, heat, and survival. The tragedy is that the Burmese python is not one of the predators that evolved there. It arrived from somewhere else. And now the native species are paying the price. So yes, the headline about a 202-pound Burmese python is dramatic, but the real story is bigger than one snake. It is a story about what happens when an invasive apex predator gets loose in the right environment and stays there long enough to thrive. It is a story about how hard it is to reverse ecological damage once it reaches a certain scale. And it is a story about the people willing to go into the swamp at night, into the mud and brush and mosquitoes, to pull these giants out before the problem gets even worse. Because every giant python captured is proof of two things at once: proof that the danger is real, and proof that someone is still fighting it. The 202-pound female caught on January 13th, 2026 was not just another snake. It was a snapshot of the invasion at full size. Nearly 17 feet of muscle, instinct, and appetite. A reproductive threat carrying about 200 eggs. A predator built to erase wildlife quietly, one meal at a time. And that is what should terrify you. Not just what one python may have eaten, but what a landscape full of hidden pythons continues to eat every single day. If you want more stories about extreme wildlife, invasive species, and the real battles happening in places most people never see, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, could you step into the Everglades knowing something like this might be watching from 10 feet away? Sources used for factual grounding: https://people.com/hunter-catches-second-heaviest-python-heaviest-Florida-history-11897-606, https://www.usgs.gov/media/images/Burmese-python-caught-Everglades, https://www.uc.edu/news/articles/2024/10/Florida's-invasive-pythons-can-eat-bigger-prey-than-we-realized.html.